Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Happy Muse Day, everybody. Dan Kent here. Shauna is on vacation, so it is just me and you. And we have a lot of staff on vacation this time of year, so I'm just going to solo it this week. And partly because I want to share some pictures, and it's a lot easier to do if it's just solo. So this week, we finished up the Walk the Way series, and this series has looked at virtues, Christian virtues as they relate to vices. And what you find is that you have these virtues like gratitude and contentment and forgiveness, and they all have these corresponding vices that relate to the virtues. So for forgiveness, the corresponding vices might be bitterness or some type of anger or hostility or something like that. Although anger is not really a vice, it's just an emotion. The point being that these virtues do have these corresponding vices. And we've looked so far at gratitude and contentment and empathy, and we looked at forgiveness. And then this week, and then Cedric did integrity. Gosh, I almost forgot about what I call the meta virtue, which is integrity. And then this week, I closed the series off by looking at generosity. And so I'm going to do a little summary, share a couple thoughts, and then, call it a day. So let me share these. Well, let me get to it first. Okay, so the sermon is called Walk the Way. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at an interesting situation, because I feel like people want to be generous. I think that most people, I mean, there's exceptions, of course, and, mental illness and bad life circumstances or whatever, but for the most part, I think that people have an impulse to help and to be generous and to contribute and impact the world around them for the better. And we, as kids, we dream of being superheroes. We don't dream of being embezzlers. We want to make a positive impact. And so that's true, except this leads to a problem. The problem is that if we all have this impulse, well, then why does the world still look like it needs so much help? And I think there are a few reasons for that. One, our impulse to help, our dreaming of being superheroes, it runs into some problems. Namely, I mean, there's a lot of them, I'm sure, but one in particular is that our villains are not as easy to fight as the villains that, say, Batman has to fight. Batman gets to face the Joker and the Penguin and the Riddler. He doesn't have to face racism. He doesn't have to face economic oppression. His job is easy compared to ours. And so that's the first thing. But the second thing is, I think that even though we start off with these good impulses and we learn them also, the world sort of changes us as we interact with the world more and more and more. One example of that, and I want to share some pictures to go along with this. I did not share these on Sunday because it was just too much work and I had a short amount of time. But one example that I used is automobiles. And so this is my first Batmobile. It was a Dodge Ram 50, and I talked about this during the sermon. And, I was very young here, obviously. And this little truck, boy, I tell you, I helped a lot of people with this little truck. And I shared the story of the guy I met who was an expert about the Alamo. And me and him fit in this little tiny truck. And that was great. I loved having a truck like this where I could just help people and give people rides, and it sort of tapped into this impulse that I had to help others. And this was my my superhero venture, you could say. The next truck I had came later. I was quite a bit older. This was in the 2000s, so about 10 years later. I had a Ford F-150, and there I am, and there I am hauling a motorcycle. And but I used to help people haul all sorts of things with this truck, and couches, and in fact, I even had a a Craigslist ad that said "guy with a truck." If you need something hauled, moved, run over, or honked at, call Dan. And then I gave my number, and yeah, so but I was able to help so many people with this truck. And now I have another truck, and which I think is the best truck ever. This is my Toyota Tacoma, and this is what I haul my wife Barbara around in, as you can see. And this is my favorite truck. And even this truck, I've been able to help just a lot of people get to where they need to go, move what they need moved. And I love that about having a truck like this. What's interesting, uh, and all of these discussions about my various Batmobiles, it was not meant to boast. It was meant to show how the things that we have in our lives can be used for good, but they can also shape us in a negative way. And that brings me to my next vehicle, which was a Volvo S60. I think it was maybe it was an S40. I can't remember the number, but this is the only picture I have of it, and that's if I'm Batman, that's Robin right there. He's my sidekick. But this vehicle is interesting because I bought this brand new, and it was. Man, it was a nice car. For some reason, I wanted something with luxury. I wanted some style, so I got this. And as I said in the sermon, it just smelled like wealth, and it felt like driving around in a new wallet. That's what it felt like. And the interesting thing about it is, I have no stories of helping anybody in this car. I did not help a single person. And I think that's interesting because, well, number one, this is the closest vehicle I've ever had to a Batmobile. Number two, at this point in my life, I was financially comfortable enough to be able to buy a car like this, but I didn't really help as many people at this point. And why is that? It raises some tough questions, like what happened to my superhero impulses? What happened to my generosity? Well, what happened is I got this car that I became afraid of. I was afraid of getting it dirty. I was paranoid that something might happen to it. I became very protective of it, which is a type of greed. And so what happened is by having this nice car, my generosity went down. Style went up, luxury went up, comfort went up, sportiness went up, generosity went down. And the point there is that our possessions can change us, and what we own can nudge us away from generosity. And so I kind of talked about that and what I talked about is that, if things can nudge us away from God like this, it sort of verifies this idea that there are these two paths, one to God and one away from God. And what I proposed is that these two paths, they have very different stories. And so I kind of looked a little bit at that. There's the story of God that sort of grounds the way of the Lord, and then there's the story of the world that sort of grounds the way of the world. And they're different in a lot of ways, but the way that I focused on how these stories ended. And if you've ever written stories, you know how important it is to have a story that ends good. A story is only as good as its ending, and that's why you don't write a story about a sinking ship while you're on the sinking ship. You wait until you get to shore before you write the story. And so that was sort of to use that story example as sort of an analogy. I asked people to ask themselves to keep this in their mind. if the story that you are living in, if there is a shore, because the fact is that going with this analogy, we are all on a sinking ship. We are all aging, we are all falling apart, we're all going to die, and society will fall apart, and even the universe is going to eventually burn out. And but the story that Christians live in, while it doesn't deny that the ship is sinking, it promises us a shore. It promises us a joyful end. Paul says in Romans that we are in birth pains, and something here is being born. God is giving birth to something greater. God is at work in this world to finish what He starts. He is bringing us together so that He may dwell with us, and He will be our God and we will be His people. And so the New Testament casts this vision of this great kind of experience, this great reality that we will be with God. And it's a reality that's way bigger than me, but it's something that I'm essentially a part of, that it's important that I'm a part of. I'm important in this story, but the story is way bigger than just me. Now, that's a very different ending than the story of the world. The story of the world basically forces you to say, well, yeah, you're on a sinking boat, but there is no shore. All you have is the sinking boat. There's no God at work here. There's nothing being born. You only have what you can find on the ship. You only have the chaos of the collapse. There's only you, and there's only the pressure of now. And these are very, very different stories. And living in these stories day after day after day, it shapes us. It molds us in different ways. And I just confess that for me, I before I kind of entered into this story, I was a shameless thief and stole money from the places that I worked, and I didn't even think much of it. But when I became compelled of the story of God, my behavior could not exist coherently with the story of God. And eventually, the story of God changed me for the better. No, that's not to say that people who live in the world story are bad people or they're thieves or anything like that. But one thing I do argue is that it living in a shoreless story like that, where all you have is yourself and your own experiences, it makes us kind of boring. It makes us hard to relate to in any meaningful way. And I gave examples of, like, think of the things that you pursue when you chase wealth and comfort and luxury and all of that stuff, is that you end up talking about, like, going parachuting, which is a thrill for you, but it's only slightly interesting to other people. Buying a slow close cabinet, it's wonderful. It's very stylish, but doesn't really sustain much conversation. And or I use the example of the heated toilet seat. Very comfortable, but it doesn't ground a relationship. And so I just noted that, we have all of these great gadgets and these just amazing things and these technologies, but it can kind of swallow us up, and we lose ourselves in them, and we become these vacuums of comfort and leisure and pleasure, and we sort of lose our humanity, and we end up finding that we have a hard time connecting with other people. And of course, AI is just going to make this worse. And really, the point to all of that is simply that all of our possessions, our wealth, our technologies, they're not bad in and of themselves. They're just not interesting. They're not bad in and of themselves. It's just that they can only be as good as the story that they serve. Our wealth, our money, our technology, our things can only be as good as the story that they serve. And if they're not helping us get to shore, if they're not helping us help other people get to shore, if the only purpose they serve is to numb us as we're sinking in the boat, well, what good are they really? And then I just talked about, even people who are successful in this world, they they're still not that interesting. And what happens is the pursuit of profit, the pursuit of growth, the just the mastery over asset and accumulation, it starts to erode their view of other people. And I shared one example of somebody who, his hiring motto is to find people who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the boss. And again, I don't have anything against capitalism. I used to own businesses and I like to trade stocks. It's just that I know that capitalism inside of a Shoreless story causes problems. It causes us to fall in love with money and use people in the pursuit of money. Whereas God's story is exactly the opposite. God's story nurtures us to love people and use money in our pursuit of loving people. I love how Psalm says, those who boast about money don't understand. That is, they don't see how the story that they live in has shaped them. And so, yeah, and I shared another example of how I have all these friends who are millionaires and how that kind of makes me feel like, what's wrong with me? Why am I behind? And that's how the story of the world works. And the cure for all of this, the cure for a bad story is a good story, especially a good story that is a true story. That's why the Bible calls it good news. And because the story that God offers has a shore and it's about more than just me. And in the story of God, I don't have to feel inferior or superior or be on that, Ferris wheel of doubt and arrogance and entitlement and shame and whatever. I can just live in the security of God's unsurpassable love for me. And in other words, I can be so comfortable in myself that I don't have to focus on myself all the time. I can focus on others. I can be generous. And I shared a couple things that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. And then I just argued that, ultimately God wants us to learn to live with open hands. And because the world story will make us feel like you are what you own. That's what you are. You are what you own. But God's story largely comes down to you are what you are willing to sacrifice or give away. And then let's see what else I got here. And then I wanted to look at a couple important stories in Luke, because in Luke you have the story of the rich young ruler, and this guy did everything right. He kept all the commandments, it says, and Jesus says, well, there's still one thing you lack. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And which is a really harsh command. That's a high standard to hold someone to, and you can see the disciples were pretty devastated by it. Also, they're like, Lord, who can be saved? I mean, you're asking us to give away everything. But that's what Jesus said to him. And you can read a passage like that and get really scared. And it's important to keep reading, is what I would say. Keep wrestling with it, because I think that there's more going on there. So if you keep reading, you encounter the next person that Luke shares is a guy named Zakius. And this guy didn't check any boxes. He was not a religious guy. He was a tax collector, and he was a admitted devious, cheating tax collector. And from his perspective, that's how the way of the world works. That's the story of the world. You get while you can while the ship is going down. But he was open-minded enough to pursue this Jesus guy because of what he had heard. And he knew that if his story of the world is wrong, well, that he needs to know that. And when he saw Jesus, he realized that that was the fact, that his story about the world was wrong. There's more going on than he thought. And he basically changed his life because of it. And he said, Lord, look, I have given away half of my possessions to the poor, and anyone that I have wronged, I will pay back 4 times. And Jesus celebrates this guy, saying, salvation has come to this home today. And it's interesting because I couldn't help but notice that he only asked Zacchaeus to give away half of his possessions. He didn't even ask. Zacchaeus just said, "This is what I have done." But and he says salvation has come to this home, even though he had just told the rich young ruler that he had to give away everything. And so, how do you make sense of that? Well, how I made sense of it is simply this: that these are two very different people. You have the rich young ruler who thought that he was in God's story, but he was just in a story for himself. And the first thing he said to Jesus is, "What must I do to be saved?" That is, what do I have to do to get all of the good things? He was just living for himself. Whereas Zacchaeus, although he was living for himself, he was open to being wrong about his whole view. And when he encountered Jesus, he changed. The rich young ruler had no interest in changing. He thought that he didn't need to change. He thought that he had everything right. He just had to do certain things to get more. And that's where he was wrong. And really, what you see in Zacchaeus is just this beautiful scene where you see that he is not boasting about what he's done. It's on the first read, it may seem like, Zacchaeus he's very boastful of what he's given. Oh, look, I gave half my possessions to the poor and I'm paying back people four times what I owe them. But I don't think that's the case. I think when you understand what's going on here, Zacchaeus is not boasting, he's celebrating. He's saying, Lord, look, I used to steal and now I give. I was a cheat, but now look at me. I've found integrity. I used to take more than I should, but look at me now. Now I pay back more than I need to. He wasn't saying, "Look how generous I am, Jesus." He was saying, "Look how much the good news has changed me." And it is such a beautiful, beautiful moment. Very, very different than the rich young ruler. And then finally, I just closed by saying the beginning of living with open hands, the beginning of living a life of generosity, it really doesn't start with giving everything away. It might culminate there, but that's not where it starts. It all starts with orienting your life around the right story because that's where the joy comes from. We're told in Second Corinthians that God loves a joyful giver, and the giving itself isn't the joy. I don't think. I think the joy is living liberated from the world story, free from the bad story of the shoreless sinking boat. And so ultimately, I think that the more you understand the story of God, the more you see how the story of the world is just exhausting, and it doesn't lead anywhere. It's spiritually exhausting, physically exhausting. I said it was existentially exhausting because in our story, it can feel like in the story of the world, that is, it can feel like you're on this hamster wheel where you're always trying to prove yourself, and it never seems to be enough. And in our economy, you always have to be adding value, but it's hard to really feel valued at the same time. And in that context, telling people that they should be generous, telling people that they have to sell all their possessions, it can just feel like one more burden on the hamster wheel. And but that's why the story of God is different. It's understanding this from a different story, and in the story of the world, not only does it feel like a hamster wheel, and it feels like it's hard to get valued, no matter how much you add value. It also is hard to just be yourself here. It's hard to be likable. It's hard to be satisfied, no matter how hard we hustle. And what I'm arguing is that maybe the reason why we experience all these things is because we are in a bad story. And really, the ultimate kind of point of my sermon is that God is inviting us into a better story, one where we can have this real sense of value. We can find that peace. We can feel that gratitude and contentment and find that integrity and eventually live with open hands and generosity. And so that's kind of the point of the message is what story are you living in? And is it God's story? And it may feel like we're living in God's story because we go to church or read our Bible, but believing God's story is different than living there. And that's something that we all have to wrestle with. How much are we actually living in this story? That is my summary. Shauna, what did you think of it? No, I'm kidding. She's not here. She's on vacation, but that's force of habit. So that is the summary. And, a couple, I don't remember all the promises I made on Sunday about what I would talk about on the MuseCast, but I will say this, the Jesus's command to the rich young ruler to go and sell everything you have and give to the poor, then come follow me. When I worked on the mental health units, I worked on these crisis units. This verse came up a few times with some manic patients who, mania is sort of a type of hysterical, high energy, extreme, idealistic thinking. And what would happen is like one guy took all of his money out of his savings account. It was like $36,000. And he went to McDonald's and he got like a cheeseburger and fries and the guy gave him the bag and then the teller gave him the bag with his food in it. He took the food out, put $36,000 back in the bag, and handed it to the McDonald's employee. And that was his idea of giving away all of his wealth to what he thought was the poor. And now that's not what Jesus meant, I don't think. I also knew, and even people who were not manic. I mean, I had a professor in graduate school who had a really good corporate job, and he felt like in order to impress Jesus, he had to quit this good paying job and go to seminary. And so he sort of boasted about this. I have given up all of my money to follow Jesus in this very low paying career. And there's nothing wrong with that. If your passion is to follow God in that way, to go to seminary. But it just seemed interesting to me that this person had made this act as sort of a victory where he is fulfilling this command of Jesus, as if this command of Jesus was something that he commanded everybody. And I don't think it was. I don't think that's what the point of that encounter with the rich young ruler was. And what's interesting is this particular professor, he soon gave up his faith and he became an atheist. And I don't know how that's all connected, but it's just really interesting to me. Like we really need to think through how we interpret these things. It would have been really nice if he could have interpreted this in a community before he made some of the decisions that he made. And from what I knew of this person, he was not very communal in his thinking. He was very much, I have the answers and I'm going to go with it. So, which so yeah, it's dangerous stuff for sure. But our possessions, we know that our possessions can change us, but it's for me, it's been just a really great reminder, especially just like how we become really sort of all of our stuff just becomes part of how we live, and we lose touch with how great these things are, and we can kind of take them for granted. And that's why all of these virtues are sort of connected. You can start to see that these are just things that I own, and their only value is how they serve the story. It's easier to see that when you can recognize it as something that I'm grateful for. As soon as I say, "Oh man, I'm so glad that I have this," well, now I know that it's this thing. I'm grateful for it. Now I can ask the next question. Is this helping me in the story that I'm serving? Is this helping me get to shore? Is this helping me help someone else get to shore? And the more all these virtues come together like that, where gratitude helps set the table for generosity, that's where you find integrity. All of these the virtues are coming together. And as you grow in these virtues, you sort of crowd out all of the corresponding vices, so there's no room for them. And that's I think how the virtues work, and that's how growth in the spirit works. Is the virtues start cooperating together, and you get these higher emerging sort of things, and they crowd out the vices. So that is, my MuseCast, my Shaunaless MuseCast. She should be back. I think she's on vacation for a couple weeks. Next week I'll have a guest with me. I'm really curious what questions people have, and I might not get to them until next week, obviously. But one of the things that people asked about after the service is, what about just having fun things? Like I have, look at all this goofy stuff I have back here. I mean, do I need two Columbo posters? I would argue yes, but I could see where someone might say you don't really need two Columbo posters. But at the same time, I enjoy them. And that's what Paul says to Timothy is the Lord provides all for enjoyment. There's nothing wrong with having things that are just fun and I just like, and they make my work joyful. And I think that's a great thing. The the problem is when they become an idol, and they only really become an idol if you are possessing them in the wrong story. In a story without a God, in a story without a shore, in a story where all you have is whatever you have during the boat sinking, that's when things become way more important than they really are. And with that, I don't even know if I have a nugget. I feel like I've shared all of my stuff. But this is my nugget. I'll refer back to this point that I made in the sermon. Um, all right, I'll do a quick nugget dance. It's not nearly as much fun without a partner to dance with, but there it is. So my nugget is just remember that when you think of generosity, it's not just about giving money. It's not just about cash, and I mean it's about your time and your attention and how you use your talents and all of that stuff. And in fact, what I would say is like right now we are experiencing this epidemic of loneliness, and I think your attention is very valuable right now, and giving people attention and spending time with people, boy, that's worth a lot right now, and anybody can do that. So it's not just about money. It's about maybe you're young and you're physically active, and you can help people with their physical needs. And but be creative. I mean, that's what's so great about the virtues and growing in the spirit is that it's so idiosyncratic. It's all very much related to who you are, and like how I'm generous is very different than how Shauna might be generous, and that's very different from how you might be generous. And so think creatively about it, about generosity and about gratitude and about contentment and about integrity and all of those things. We're called to make all of the virtues our own. And so keep an open mind on all of that. With that, I will see you all next week.